The TIF study has been put on there. Ways and Means just took out the advanced wood heat sales tax exemption. But I think if I put something on they just took off, we might not get miscellaneous tax through. It needs to go through. So the wood heat people want to do something, they've got to find another vehicle. But I think a study for mini TIFs, and maybe just a study on the infrastructure needs of municipalities and ways the state could assist, include, mini TIFs. I don't want to just do a mini TIF study. I want to do something a little broader. We can do that. Okay. You want to come up? Sure. Okay. Rebecca, oh, I told Rebecca, no, that was on dispatch. I told you I'd give you equal, not dispatch. The last thing they said is the reappraisal. And we're gonna work on it. I'm told it's not one of the must-dos I must get out of here. I think other than miscellaneous tax, we've done all our must-dos with the bottle bill. This one has to go. I'm told, is it the Barry TIF bill is on the floor today, and that has some decorations. And I'm waiting for that to see if something needs to get added to miscellaneous tax, because I don't think we're gonna have time to get that bill back. I know I'm not gonna have time to do, well, maybe we could concur with further proposal and pull out. I'm told there's a lot of veggie changes or things in there. They've told me they don't have time to do anything to property tax, so don't put that on. And I've told them we don't have time to do any justice to any major veggie changes. So if they'll just strip that out, you might get it back. But I have to see how it comes over. Tax is such a broad word that it could get decorated further on the floor. So, but we've only got really 2 places that I know of that we've got, this is just, take us through it, Abby.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. So for the record, Abby Shepherd, Legislative Council. This is H471, which is the act relating to technical and administrative changes to Vermont's tax laws, just referring to it as miscellaneous tax. I do want to point out that it doesn't have that title this year because it did sort of lean more technical and administrative. There are several documents under my name or today's date on the committee's webpage. So far, there is a draft 1.1 version of a committee amendment, but this is sort of the beginning of any of these different amendments that you would like to make. So in its current version, it does not have any TIF related language or any veggie related language. And I would have to defer to my colleagues, David Hall and Becky Wasserman, for the drafting of those, but I would be happy to add those into this amendment for the miscellaneous tax bill. So if you'd like, I could share my screen and either, I don't know if you'd like I did a walkthrough of the bill as it passed the House. If you'd like,
I'm looking at the section by section.
Would you like me to briefly go through that again?
Just then if anyone's watching, they can see that too.
And then I can explain what the proposed amendment would do. Up on the screen for you.
There we go.
Make it a little bigger. Okay. So I'll try and keep this fairly high level so that we're not getting too much into the weeds, but just to give you a quick rundown of, as you said, it's maybe one of, in its current version, one of the less controversial bills. It is quite technical. The first two sections are the annual link up. So those are often considered must pass provisions. They're often in the miscellaneous tax bill. Sometimes they're in the budget. So this links up the Vermont income tax statutes to federal statutes. So that's where you pull the federal income tax definitions. If these weren't updated, actually the second section is for estate tax. Most of the discussions sort of focus on income tax because that's the larger revenue impact. If you didn't update these, then Vermont's tax code would be linked to last year's federal internal revenue code. So that's why each year the legislature typically chooses to update those. If they weren't updated, then the filings that have been happening this spring would not necessarily be correct because they were based on tax forms based on the assumption that that Vermont's income tax code would link up to federal statute. It's always retroactive.
Anybody object to those two sections?
Any changes in the federal state tax?
In the estate tax, no, not to my knowledge. And the federal income tax statutes themselves, no major changes, although there were some indexing changes made federally. Those do not directly impact Vermont. No major changes. I think Pat or Ted Barnett were in here from JFO at the beginning of the session talking about changes.
Yeah. Okay, nothing major,
But nothing with a
major.
big, nothing major, nothing like during the pandemic years where federal changes were retroactive and had direct impact on Vermont
We have
tax
heard a
liability.
few uneventful years. Was it March? They were still, yeah.
Yes, that was the CARES Act, I
This
believe,
is
Families
good.
First or CARES Act. Besides.
Okay,
Okay, so those are the first two sections. The next two sections, so sections 3 and 4 of the bill, relate to taxation of alcoholic beverages. So this would line up both the meals and rooms tax and alcoholic beverages statute with some definitions that are in Title 7. It would also clarify that alcoholic beverages are subject to sales tax when they're sold for consumption off premises. So that lines up with the expansion of
so
the
I drink it at the
rules.
restaurant, it's
To go.
if I get a to-go cocktail that we just did on the floor, that we did here, then that gets a sales tax.
Correct.
But if I drink it, yeah, okay, and that. All right,
When they're sold for consumption off premises. And then it makes sort of harmonizing changes. So one of the section 3 is in the sales tax chapter, section 4 is within the meals and rooms and alcohol beverages tax chapter.
Is this kind of a COVID, I'm sorry, is this kind of a COVID adjustment when restaurants shifted into selling alcoholic beverages and now it's become kind of expectation or norm when they're selling meals for consumption?
That is my understanding of the sort of genesis of this. That's not a PPM to be permitted. I'm not the attorney that staffs that, but I believe it was by executive order and then
we just
alcohol beverages
extended
bill,
it in the
yes,
alcohol, in the bill, we voted out here this morning, extends that sunset. So
to continue.
It
sales
has
tax
to
on
be
beverages.
in a sealed container, you can't just take your martini glass and walk out the door. It's in a sealed martini, or we are now,
Umbrella on top.
and we've done a lot of work with cocktails to go in a can. You can now buy those, but yeah, this is clarifying the COVID change that is still in effect, that you can go to a restaurant, buy your martini in a sealed container and go home. In that case, it pays sales tax. If you sit down at the bar and drink it, you pay, you pay the rooms, meals and alcohol.
And that language you see in the section by section is what would be enacted in the statute. So it's beverages that are produced or manufactured by a restaurant or operator and sold in sealed containers for consumption off premises. and then the restaurant or operator does have to be licensed.
Okay. There's two of these because we're amending two different sections of statute.
And two different chapters, so
Two
it's.
different chapters, but it's the same change.
Exactly, yes, so it's sales tax and it's two different tax types, so you're clarifying it within sales tax, also clarifying it within the Meals and Rooms tax chapter where alcoholic beverages tax is codified as well.
Anybody have questions, concerns with that one? I'm not seeing any, so we will keep going. No red flags. All right. Refunds. Okay.
So there are a couple of different issues being addressed here. So the first is within the Meals and Rooms tax chapter, this adds in a requirement that lines up again with the sales tax. It makes a similar process within the Meals and Rooms tax chapter for an operator to request a refund. So because both sales tax and Meals and Rooms tax are what are considered trust taxes, so the vendor, the operator, the restaurant is selling and collecting tax on behalf of the state. It is not the operator vendor's tax revenues, those are the state's revenues. So the vendor, if they erroneously collected tax, they have to show that they've refunded the purchaser to then be able to request a refund from the state. And the Department of Taxes identified that Meals and Rooms tax wasn't clear as to that process. Sales and use tax already was, so the language that would be codified for Meals and Rooms tax would reflect the same process as what already exists for sales tax.
There's a question. Let's say you have a restaurant that accepts payment both in cash and by credit card. They may be able to identify those people who paid by credit card and refund to them. People who paid by cash would not be able to be refunded because they couldn't identify them. Is there then a process by which the vendor would be responsible for determining and split and be able to pay the appropriate money's back to the people who paid them, and then the rest, what happens to it? Does it go back to the Department of Taxes? Or?
So the vendor would not, if the vendor can't show that they have refunded the purchaser, then I guess in that cash example, they would not be able to request a refund. The purchaser would still be able to request a refund, but I don't know if there are other processes already in place.
But there's no process by which the purchaser would even know that a refund was due, which is something we've run into before.
Yes.
The department doesn't have, for example, the ability to place a notice, for example, that would be available in the public to say, if you bought such and such from so-and-so during such a period and paid tax on it, you're entitled to a refund. That would be one way, but right now, people don't know that they're entitled to a refund.
You had a store that was improperly collecting a local option tax, right? To refund.
Yeah, that's the classic example of that. How does a person know that they've overpaid?
And I think what we heard when we were looking at other sections of this about online sales go by zip codes, and sometimes the zip code isn't in the town that has the tax, or you have a zip code and you should have paid the tax, no one will go call on
Well,
that one.
theoretically, the program will identify that portion of the zip code that is subject to the option tax and those that's not.
Yeah,
but
it'll
doesn't
take a
always
while.
work.
No, it'll take a while, but this, yeah, we've had one confusion, and again, I know I shopped there and bought a rose bush, but unless I've kept my sales slip, I can't prove that I bought a rose bush there. I mean, or
Well, not only
anything
can you
else.
not prove it, you don't even know that you're owed it.
Right. So I don't know. Rebecca, do you know what happens if money can't be refunded, or is this just rare enough so that it hasn't become a major issue?
No, sure. Rebecca Samroth, Deputy Commissioner, Vermont Department of Taxes. So any sales and use or meals and rooms or local option tax money that has been determined to be erroneously collected, like in the example we're discussing where a business has mistakenly been collecting local option tax, that money stays in the state coffers going to the respective fund where it would have gone if it was correctly collected unless someone claims a refund, and that could be done through the customer going directly to the business asking for a refund, and then the business showing documentation of that to the department to get a refund. Then of the tax that they remitted incorrectly, or the customer can go right to the department and get a refund directly.
But see, again, the problem is, how does the customer know? There's no mechanism for the customer to know, even if the department has made a determination that that organization has been charging customers a 1% tax. And in the case that I brought to your attention, this is a 1% tax for a period of multiple years, and based on the sales per outlet, that could amount to $500,000 owed to Vermonters.
When the magnitude of an issue is of that scale, like if the department knows about a miscollection issue going on at a vendor, we're absolutely, taking all the steps to alert the vendor of that so they can make corrective
Well, if the
action.
vendor doesn't do anything,
You're
then
totally
what?
correct that confidentiality statutes don't let us put any announcement up about that. But we really have to, trust the process. If a mischarge is big enough for someone to notice it on their receipt, then I think there's many opportunities for them to seek a refund. Oftentimes, if we're talking about a local option tax issue, we're talking about 1%. And I think you're right, it's very possible that some people will never know if they were mischarged, and we'll have to wait for us to find the vendor's error another way or another.
Well, again, what are you doing to do that? I see no effort whatsoever other than making it available if a person finds out so they can come to you. But I see no effort to even publicize the fact that this kind of erroneous charge has been going on for years and that people are entitled to a refund. How would anyone know that they're entitled to a refund?
Did you say you couldn't put a notice out because of confidentiality?
The department can't speak to the tax situation of any one taxpayer. but
Okay,
business
I'm
could
just wondering,
absolutely
could we
put out-
require that the vendor post a sign that says,
If you're in this zip code.
if you bought something here, you may have erroneously paid sales tax, please see the manager.
That'd be a policy decision, for the legislature to continue.
Well, I think it'd be
consider.
something though that we look for the tax department to come to us and say, what should we do to solve this problem?
I don't see I think we're doing an excellent job managing miscollection issues now. I don't think there's a large unmet need here.
I think this
That would be
may
my
just be, you had a
I
zip
would
code.
absolutely
maybe it's
disagree
that.
with that,
Okay,
because in the volume of this affecting people in St. Albans and Swan, I've seen nothing from the department that would notify consumers that they're entitled to anything, and nothing from the vendor notifying consumers of the overcharge.
okay,
Nothing.
why don't we see if we can't get something drafted that would say that when, and it's gonna be a zip code mistake, I think. You had a St. Albans, yeah, you had a St. Albans zip code and you were in the town and not the city. So,
Well, the
something
zip
that
code
says
was
that,
not the customer's zip code, the zip code was the vendor's zip code.
right, this is the vendor's zip
I
code.
mean,
And so, just if there is a refund, of, just because somebody got charged, 6 cents on something that they shouldn't have gotten charged on, but a refund of any a mass refund like this, everybody got, not some clerk charged somebody 3 cents more than they were supposed to pay or 6 cents more. But that there was a mistake on the part of the vendor, then the vendor shall be required to post a notice that.
Would that be for both meals and rooms tax, alcoholic beverages tax, and sales and use tax? You're talking about vendors, but that would be in the sales tax world. Would you want it also within meals and
No,
rooms
and I mean,
tax?
it may be above a certain amount, it may be something that's material, so that it doesn't become a busy work exercise on one hand, but on the other hand, customers right now have no recourse unless they're aware of something that the tax department says is confidential in the first place.
Yeah, but, was that vendor remitting that?
I don't know what's confidential, they won't tell me.
I think we can assume they probably were, because if they were charging it and not remitting it, now that the tax department
presumably-
found out, they would.
Yeah, presumably there would be some action, but again, how do you know?
You don't.
Without
And
doing
that's-
considerably more due diligence than a consumer ought to have to do.
That's pretty similar.
Yes.
So when you're receiving, tax like that,
Oh, that's great. Could I make one, a final statement on this? Yeah, I just want to clarify that I think the roles involved here are important to keep in mind. Like, it is absolutely a vendor's role to know and comply with their sales tax liability, both state and local. And it is our role, the department, to really help them, get there, understand it if they're confused, correct it if they're making an error. But we don't, I don't think we should be involved in interactions between the customer and the vendor. If there's an announcement that the vendor wants to make within the community about an issue, I don't think their tax has a role to play in that. But I will confirm that we take any
Yeah.
flags of this really seriously and we address it right away. So
Would there be an issue, because chances are that it's gonna be fairly rare that you get this kind of being in one zip code, I mean, with the cities and the villages and towns and stuff, yeah, we could see some more of this kind of mix up, because I'm in St. Albans owns a tax, but St. Albans town doesn't. Some places it's the town that might owe the tax, or the village, and the town doesn't. And especially if you don't live there, I still don't know where Waterbury Village or Waterbury Town are, because they're all on Route 100, A or B, and Route 2. If you were born there, you know where they are. But other than that, I can see where the potential for confusion is there, because villages and towns sometimes have the same zip code, but not the same municipal government. So would there be a problem if we just said, in case of a gross error, I charged you the town zip code and my store was really in the village, and the village doesn't have a zip code? That upon being notified of that area, and that could be by Senator Brock or the tax department, but upon that the vendor shall apply to you for a rebate and shall post a note. First, they have to post a notice.
right, we would only honor refunds to the business with documentation that they had given a refund to a
They'd have to
customer.
post a notice once they were notified.
If you get something of substantial magnitude, the potential $500,000, I think it's substantial magnitude.
Yeah.
There should be a requirement for the vendor to take action to ensure that the taxes that have been over collected have been repaid to the customers who paid them.
Yeah.
And that the responsibility of the tax department should be to oversee that, the
Right,
fact that the vendor has such a process in place. And the question would be, is if we did an amendment, something to that effect, would the tax department be supportive of that?
Yeah, I'd have to see, bring that back to our legal team to see if there's any concerns.
if you can, find out what,
Do you think
I
we
know
could
what we
construct an
can do.
amendment like that?
Does Ken want to reconcile the submission, the remittances
$10,000 or more in
by
total?
vendor, by
Totally
the
arbitrary.
locality, so that you know whether you should be seeing a local option tax collected?
It's not as simple because like a vendor may have some sales that are subject to local option tax and some that aren't. Like if they're shipping, like a florist for Imagine, some of their, imagine a florist who's in the city of Essex Junction, which has a local option tax, but a lot of their sales go over the border to Essex Town with no local option tax. So there wouldn't be like a mathematical way to say how many of their sales should have had local option tax applied. It would be nice if it was as easy as just, multiply by 1% and we can see if there's any error, but it's a different mix for all different types of vendors.
There would be different times, I'd imagine, in situations such as that you said. In the particular case that I'm talking about, though, a vendor was located in a town that did not have a local option tax, and they were collecting one
Right.
for 5 years.
And in those situations, we get notice of that relatively quickly, depending on what the
And
vendor
this
is.
again, it was a situation in which others have come to me, because the way I found out about it is people have said they've come to the vendor on multiple occasions and they've done nothing about it. One said he also wrote to the tax department about it and nothing happened.
But, I believe everything has been resolved to me.
Would there be a class action
See,
suit?
when you say everything's been resolved, it's been resolved because I know that I got the ability to file a request from you after I hunt down all the credit card receipts that I paid over 5 years, but nobody else knows that. Because nobody else has been told about it.
So we're
And the
looking,
vendor hasn't certainly told anybody.
we're looking for a public notice so that people know they have the right to request a refund. And until they do,
Well, it's either that or some mechanism that the tax department, leave it to the tax department to come up with what's the best way to do it. So the tax department is in compliance with our other laws, but there has to be a way to notify the public of their rights.
Yeah.
Basically, we're protecting the rights of someone who overcharged people by potentially $500,000 to the exclusion of the taxpayers who paid that money in. That's not right.
so let's see if we can't get something drafted and put it in, if we can do that. Is anyone on the committee have a problem with that? Some way to notify consumers that they may be owed. I mean, I get things in the mail. I don't know, I think I got 20 cents because I bought something from somebody and there was a settlement. I have no idea what it is, but I've gotten a couple of those. Very small amount, some kind of a national settlement. And you're 1/1 millionth of the people that did business with this group, and you get $5. I don't think we are not in a position to do that. We don't have tort lawyers making lots of money, but some public notice, I'd say in the news, I mean, I know you could probably put it on your website, but I don't think most people check out the tax department website. And the standard way is put it in the newspaper, but very few people get the newspaper. And to date, Digger doesn't do public notices, so. Front Porch Forum, do you have Front Porch Forum up your way?
Yeah.
There we go.
I'm sure this is something the tax department can figure out a good
Yeah, that is
recommendation for
something
us,
to see if we can
rather than imposing something from our perspective.
think about it, see what you.
Yeah, I guess like my initial thoughts are just concerns about burden on businesses, like where the responsibility is for a purchaser to be aware of, what's on their receipt.
Well,
Like,
essentially
we
what
can't-
I've suggested, I've asked council to try to draft something to that effect and take let's say $10,000 as a threshold, so that we're not looking for nickels and dimes, that we're looking only for things that are substantive. And I don't know if 10,000 is the right number, the committee may, others might have some idea, but it just in total. That we have a situation that amounts that kind of volume of consumers' money, that there ought to be some mechanism that the consumer is made aware of it.
Be aware, so the consumer can ask for a refund directly from the tax department.
Or from the vendor,
or the vendor.
or the vendor hunts down, and whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
But the money could be with the vendor, the money could be, in all probability, if it's just a simple error by the vendor, the money's with the tax department.
Yes, the money's with the tax department, if they're paid quarterly or some of them they pay monthly, if they're big. So, yeah, I mean, if there's any mass kind of mistake going on, then the bulk of it is with the tax department. If I come back and say, you charge me sales tax, give me my 8 cents back, but, okay. So C, Abby, would you draft that?
Yes.
See if we can get something drafted, and I will run that possibility by Ways and Means. I've actually been 6 whole hours without meeting. Let's hope they're seeing the light. Okay, so we'll get a,
I can,
Are you formally in conference?
What?
You're formally in
they have a bill,
pre-conference.
but they're trying to make sure that we get out of here on Friday. So, okay, so here we go.
so that discussion sort of bled into both of these sections. They both have to do with refunds. So the first was just within the Meals and Rooms tax chapter, and that was allowing purchasers to request a refund and requiring operators to show that they've refunded purchasers before an operator can request a refund. So I need to think about where I would draft this new requirement, whether it would be within the same section or with one of the licensing requirement sections. I'll think that through before I
Okay.
provide draft language there. In section 6 of the bill, that's getting at more specifically the local option tax issue where there have been erroneously collected local option taxes, particularly where there are 2 towns with similar names, but should be separate zip codes. So that section is slightly different. It does require local option tax that's been collected to be refunded to the purchaser, the operator, if the purchaser was already refunded, or if that purchaser can't be determined, those tax collections will be split in the same way that sales and use tax or Meals and Rooms tax are currently allocated. So whether it's the education fund for sales and use tax or Meals and Rooms tax, which is split between ed fund, general fund, and complete other fund.
We're recognizing now that local option tax is becoming much more common. And zip codes don't always follow town lines, that we are likely to have more mistakes made. And so this says, fine, if you made a mistake, the vendor realizes, oops, I've been making a mistake and I did this. You have to show that you have, in fact, refunded the money to your customers. Or your customers have to directly show that they spent this money. So somebody needs to have a receipt. Otherwise, everybody and their cousin can come in and say, oh, I was at that restaurant too. And you owe me $8 in tax or something. Okay.
Yes, so this provides a default if the purchaser cannot reasonably be determined, the tax revenue will be allocated as under existing statute for the underlying taxes. The next 2 sections are repealing the CAP-TAP programs. There's the Computer Assisted Property Tax Administration Program, and there was an associated fee. And this repeals the codification of that fee in that program, which my understanding is that it is no longer being used. And this was a request from the department and the Division of Property Valuation.
May I ask you a question?
Yeah.
This is, I don't want to get bogged into minutia, but this is just a process question regarding the sales and use tax and the restaurant meals tax. Suppose you have a restaurant that is located in a town that delivers, and it delivers to a town that does not have a local option tax. Which tax rate applies?
Both Meals and Rooms tax and sales and use tax are destination based, which means that tax is charged based on where the consumer ultimately takes possession. So the address that the meal is delivered to is the jurisdiction that matters.
I will bet you on pizza delivery in St. Albans, as an example. I wonder if that's happening.
We'll absolutely encourage you to collect the receipt and send it to us if you see an issue.
Yeah, I mean, I was working in a store downtown and a woman came in, purchased something, said, I'm paying for it here, ship it to my house in Connecticut, and I don't owe you sales tax.
Yeah.
And we called the tax department, because that didn't sound logical. Because the money was changing hands in Vermont, but we were going to ship it, or she was paying us to ship it. She obviously knew what she was doing.
Every question or issue needs a snappy name. It needs to be in your Pizzagate.
Pizzagate.
And we're busted.
Okay, Randy Brockett Pizzagate. Actually, somebody left, tried to deliver a cup of coffee from Dunkin' Donuts on my steps, and we said, it's not ours. So, yeah, apparently delivery is a new thing. I would never think of having it, maybe if I were invalided and couldn't walk, but to have a cup of coffee too. That's just me, and I didn't grow up in the city. So, off we go.
Were there any questions on the CAP-TAP program and fee repeal?
We're not using it anymore, so we're repealing the per parcel and special fund, all the fees that were associated with it.
There are two sections, because there are two different sections that relate to CAP-TAPs, repeals any language there in statute. The next couple of sections relate to current use. The first is removing the requirements for the Director of Property Valuation and Review to send current use related notices by mail. And I laid out with bullet points the different types of notices that were required to be sent by mail to either the applicant's last and usual place of abode, the enrollee's last and usual place of abode, and then there was also, again, these are physical paper mailings that were required to municipalities where PVNR was sending a list of all current use properties by mail. So this removes that mailing requirement, and it allows the director to continue to communicate with these applicants, enrollees, and municipalities, but not necessarily by mail.
By mail, okay. Well, if we can do this, maybe I can get cancellation of your insurance notice by email. That's only been 10 years in the making.
Defer to Maria Royal for that.
I know, I didn't think that would be that controversial, but you still can do it by mail. You know, you've got an older person that doesn't do computers or lives in a hollow where, you know, you can still send notices by mail. But for people that have emails or phones, then they can do it that way. All right.
Yes, this doesn't preclude the division or the director from sending mailings. It just that they don't have to do it for every single notice, but it can also be by other means, such as email or phone calls.
Okay.
The provision in section 10 relates to the land use change tax. So when land is removed from current use or developed, there is typically a 10% land use change tax that applies. This land use change tax section is amended so that there would be an exemption from the land use change tax, which would apply to any of the land that was made exempt from property tax for Native American tribes or nonprofit organizations that qualifies for an exemption because the nonprofit is organized for Native American tribes' benefit and controlled by the tribe. And the property must be used for the purposes of the tribe and not leased or rented for profit. That was the property tax exemption that the General Assembly passed last year, and it applies to for
So
recognized.
this puts in the tax statute the exemption we passed last year.
It puts into the land use change
Okay.
tax statute. So it's related to the exemption that was passed last year. So because that exemption was created from property tax, this is sort of a corresponding exemption for land use change tax. So if a property is being taken out of current use and it is owned by one of these qualifying organizations, then it will not be subject to the land use change tax. And once a property is listed under statute as exempt from land use change tax, the owner can also request, because there's also a lien that's placed on the property, the owner can request the department or the director of property valuation review to remove the lien. So it's both no taxes owed and the lien can be removed.
Okay,
So typically you have to pay the tax to have the lien removed.
all right. Okay, this would not be, I can trace my heritage back and I've got DNA tests that says I'm a Native American and I owe 100 acres. The thing we passed last year said it was tribal, right? It has to be owned by the tribe.
Yes, and I
There was
listed
a-
out. the
Was it
full-
less than 10 acres in this? It was a
No,
very good
it's-
amount of land.
There are only 4, because there is statutory language around which Native American tribes qualify, and this links to that statute, so it's only those that are recognized under state law. That are owned by the tribe, so not individual, not property that is owned by an individual. Also nonprofit organizations that own land, and it is owned for the tribe's benefit.
So it's a Native American Heritage Society, but there was a piece of land on which they had meetings and power. There was a piece of land that was used that was, if I remember the testimony, I'm visualizing a lake, so. But there is a piece of land that the tribes use that is not owned by the tribe per se, but by maybe the Abenaki Heritage Society or Native American. But if a tribe that had never been connected with this area, I don't think the Apaches or the Pueblos were ever in New England, that if they came here and decided they were going to buy land, that would not be,
It would have to be recognized
would
by
have to be a recognized.
commission, by the Vermont Commission.
Yeah.
Or if it were a nonprofit that is organized for the tribe's benefit and controlled by the tribe, and the land can't be leased or rented for profit, then that land would qualify.
Was food shelf involved? There were a couple things. There was, I'm thinking in American Legion, but a similar kind of organization that did, I think they had a food shelf there and did other things for tribal welfare. I remember that. Okay. Okay.
Yes, so that is within the land use change tax. The next section,
This was one of the controversial ones, right? Or
yes, so the next 2
not easy.
sections, I might pause because this is where the amendment language would be inserted. But first, I just wanted to point out for section 11, there is no amendment currently in the draft version. I know you had some discussions about this during the last time this bill was taken up, but there wasn't a clear consensus on how, if you wish to amend this section. So to refresh your memory, the proposal that came from the Department of Taxes and that was passed in the House version of H471 is to create a property transfer tax and also clean water surcharge exemption for transfers between related 501c3 nonprofit organizations. So they do have to be related organizations. It's not unrelated nonprofits. But then there was this second, I'm sorry. Shouldn't talk with my hands. Screen. If there's a second transfer within 5 years of the first transfer, there is this sort of clawback mechanism that would invalidate that exemption. So there would be tax due both on the first transfer and the second transfer. And my understanding was there were some questions about including that clawback and whether or not the committee wanted to keep that, but I did not draft language. There wasn't a clear decision
Okay.
there.
What happens now? I'm a nonprofit. I run a nonprofit childcare center. And I merge with another nonprofit, probably a bigger one. We form the United Childcare nonprofit. The center I own, the property, whatever's on it, now transfers to this other nonprofit. Okay, is there a property transfer tax there?
So under current statute, there would be. This is
Okay.
put into an existing exemption that's very specific for open space land and farmland. Also, there's a nonprofit component to that exemption, but this would create an exemption for any related nonprofit organization. So it's not
Okay.
specific as to the purpose of the.
Right, so right now, a nonprofit sells property to another nonprofit, they pay the property transfer tax. And anyone after that, they pay the property transfer tax. The proposal is that that first sale is not taxed.
If they're related organizations. And they must qualify as 501c3, so that's the charitable,
Yeah.
scientific, educational, religious
Okay.
purpose.
And this is a related. So there's no tax, but if they sell it to a third party, either for profit or not for profit,
Correct.
okay,
Then within 5 years after the date of the first transfer, then tax would be due on both transfers.
okay,
Within
third
30 days.
party. Okay, so then tax due on both transfers. Okay, so you're getting a break if you're just selling out to a bigger fish. You're being,
If it's related.
if it's
Only if it's
related, all right, I'm a little fish, I'm getting eaten up by a big fish. I don't owe the property transfer tax, I do now, that, the minute my property transfers to this other related entity, I pay a tax. Under the proposal, that first transaction, me to the related other thing, we're both nonprofits. There is no tax. But if within 5 years, I sell, the big fish now sells to a bigger fish or a smaller fish with lots of money. Not all, and this is within a 5-year window. Not only is the property transfer and there's the other water surcharges in there too. The property all related taxes or required taxes are due on that transaction and looks back to the first transaction. So this is really to allow, it makes it easier to do one sale, but not to quickly do a second sale. And is the concern that I've been getting a lot of tax benefits for being a not-for-profit, and that if I take all that property that I've accumulated, and depending on my tax status, I may not be paying even property tax on it. And then I sell it to, international hotels, whatever. And we've been running a little, camp for disabled children, and we sell to a bigger, we merge with somebody that owns the other half of the lake. We don't want us selling out to Hotels International. If we're gonna do that, we want to recoup the taxes we should have gotten. If in 8 years or 6 years, we sell. So if we have good tax accountants, we're not going to pay that tax. Unless we really need to get out from under and we want the money right away. And that will be our
So I just wanted to point out as well that there are, just in existing statute, there are transfers between related corporations and other business entities that are currently exempt. So there are also some, not exactly the same structure for exemptions, but there is already
Okay,
for
so if I am
profit.
Corporation C Vermont and I merge with Corporation C New Hampshire, they're treated the same way.
So I could read one of them. So transfers made by a partnership to a partner in connection with the complete dissolution of the partnerships, that's in terms of a dissolution, or at the time of formation of a partnership, and then also for corporations, transfers between corporations where there is no gain or loss recognized, those are also exempt transfers.
Okay,
So they're slightly similar exemptions
So this
already
is-
under statute.
Okay.
So, the first case where 501c3, regulated 501c3, is this a part to motivate legitimate transfer, we're only waiving what's a legitimate transfer in a way, right? But then if there's a sale after year 6, there will be PPP due, but it's only on the second sale.
Yep.
Okay, so the vetting on the part of the first 501c3, we're saying you've made a legitimate, genuine, appropriate sale once the 5 years is met.
Okay. Rebecca, can you share what the tax department's thinking is on this?
Yeah, we spoke about this last time I was in, that we have a lot of flexibility on this one. We added that holding period because similar language is used elsewhere in the Internal Revenue Code. But it was more in an abundance of caution and for a hypothetical situation. So if the committee's more comfortable either shortening the duration of that holding period or removing it, or
No, I think what I'm trying to figure out is, A, why did you recommend the change? In that
a hypothetical to make sure.
hypothetical, right now, we pay the transfer tax if for-profit A and for-profit B, you know.
If nonprofit A and nonprofit B are related and are
Yeah,
transferring.
so now so we're really doing this to put nonprofits on par with business,
Corporations.
corporate kind of mergers. But we want to prevent that kind of potential hypothetical could happen. As I said, I own half the lake. You know, the other camp owns half the lake. I sell out to them and, you know, we merge. And then 2 years later, we sell out to Hotels International and they put up multi-million-dollar condos or something. Okay. So that's kind of our fail-safe.
Yeah, it's a fail-safe, but we're, again, very flexible to change that, or like potentially adding like some commissioner discretion if that second transfer feels, you know, it's like not above board, perhaps something to be done.
That gets judgment in the way.
That's a great point that Rebecca brings up, because I could show you the language if you want to see in the first, saying that it's exempt if it's between related organizations. It does have language about the commissioner determining, or it's an allowed transaction if the commissioner does not determine that the primary purpose of the sale is to avoid tax. So that is actually in the language already. So it does give the commissioner some guardrails, even on that first transaction, to say, if we find that this is tax avoidance, then the exemption will be allowed.
Okay, and I assume then we can all go to court. All right. Okay, so there is the commissioner's responsibility to keep an eye on these. I doubt that there'd be too many. But there's always the potential there. And yes, if within a short period of time, those assets are going to be sold at a profit, then I would assume we might want our taxes back. Okay, Senator Brock, you seem to have concerns with this one when it first came up. Probably because you were the only one that understood it.
Well, I'm not sure that I do. It's kind of like just a 30-second recitation of what this means precisely.
So it creates an exemption from the property transfer tax when there's an initial transfer between two related nonprofits. And then it has this discretion left to the commissioner. If the commissioner determines the purpose of that transaction was to avoid tax, then if that transaction won't be exempt. It does again have to be between related organizations. And then there's a second sort of guardrail around that first transaction if there's another transaction within 5 years. And Again, there isn't that language that's necessarily saying that the commissioner needs to determine it's not for tax avoidance, that could be added if you wanted. But if there's a second transaction within 5 years, then both transactions will be subject to tax.
Yeah, and that again was, the way my question is why? If they're essentially appropriate transactions that are not done for the purpose of avoiding tax, why would you prohibit the second one if the first one was okay? And if they're both okay in terms of what the intent is, why would you make that description? I just didn't understand the purpose of it.
I'm contemplating a scenario where a nonprofit sells to another nonprofit of related purpose, avoiding the tax, and then that new bigger one says, you know what, we don't want this asset, and then they sell it for a different purpose. That we are allowing us to tax the original transfer between the two nonprofits because they repurposed the asset, and that we want to collect more money and they're changing the purposes of that transfer.
Would it help if we put commissioner discretion? Because I could see when we got a lot of really small nonprofits around here that don't have accounting departments. And I think we're trying to prevent the scenario where the folks that own sections, have camps or, camps for disabled kids on sections of the lake. One buys out the other. That's fine. Maybe one buys a third piece over here. They now own a big piece. If they sell it to Hotels International, I don't know that the taxpayers in Vermont want to be footing that bill. But if it's just 3 nonprofits and they say, if we put all of these 3 pieces together, we can offer better swimming and hiking and have a better camp. And so we're gonna be able to do more for kids with cancer, say. And I'm wondering could we give the commissioner
But that's
discretion?
not what this is.
Yeah.
What this is 2 nonprofits one nonprofit selling to another nonprofit.
Okay, they're not paying there.
And they're non-taxable if they do it once, or if they do it twice. The identical transaction on the identical conditions, I don't understand why the second one would be taxed.
So can I try to answer it and see if I'm learning what's going on here? The point of exempting the purchaser, nonprofit number 2, from paying the PTT, then I'd imagine if to help 2 nonprofits make the transaction more affordable. The buyer
Right now they're
pays the
paying a
PTT.
tax.
But the permission to avoid paying the PTT is based on the state's support for the notion of 501c3 has some mission that has a social benefit, so we're foregoing it. If the second party you sold to then sold on to someone who wasn't qualified, then you say, well, wait, you really sold through another party and you made like a commercial transaction. The community value that was there is gone. I would think this would inspire nonprofit number 1 to find better partners in order to ensure that we maintain the community value.
It just seems like we're stretching it there, if we're talking about 2 nonprofits. There's everything else about it being sold to a third party is purely speculative at this point.
Right.
That if you're gonna have some sort of a tax penalty imposed for selling it to a for-profit organization, at some point in the indeterminate future, if and when that happens, that would be the event that might generate a tax.
So
With
is it
2
in
nonprofits,
5 years? No, the 2 nonprofits right now
yeah,
are paying a tax. Under this proposal, they wouldn't pay a tax
to sell to each other,
to sell to each
one
other.
to the other.
But if they go within 5 years and sell to a third party, then they would owe the tax on both transactions. So we could say you only owe the tax on the second transaction. Or we could say, we could give, as we have in other places, the commissioner has the discretion that if this is a sale to a commercial for-profit, if it's a sale for profit that's being,
Which the previous owners had a share.
yeah. I mean, we can figure, but allow because not all third sales are gonna be the same.
But it says though, if I read it correct, if related nonprofits transfer exempt property. It doesn't say transfer exempt property to a not-for-profit. It says transfer.
Maybe I should pull up the actual language. It might just
Yeah,
be
but
my.
that's-
Yeah, I mean, yeah,
This is
maybe,
somewhere.
yeah. I could perhaps understand it if they were transferring it to a for-profit organization.
The language isn't specific as to what, it's just any subsequent transfer would be taxable.
I don't
So
know.
it's not specific as to it being sold to
And that's the
another.
point that I'm making. If it's transferred to another nonprofit, why would it be taxable?
Because if the transfer was done intentionally to avoid the transfer, the tax that it would otherwise pay, because different entities have different tax statuses, so this is a.
But I think it should say that, if it's done to avoid tax, and the commission determines that, and which I assume the commission looks at these transactions anyway, with that in mind. But that's not what it says. It just says automatically that will happen.
Let's see what
Commissioner
the
discretion.
actual language said. Here we go.
So this is the initial exemption. So transfers between two related 501c3s. And it has, starting on line 29, it defines related. I'm just scroll down. Sorry, I'll make this a little bigger. And then this is the.
Oh, so that's a
holding
much
period.
more, so it holds 50% or more of the membership.
Yes, so it does need to be, so because of the 50%, the only way that if there's a subsequent transfer, it would have to be back to that other nonprofit unless it's reorganized itself somehow. There would only be two, right, if they each own half.
Could you back it up? I was looking to see what that whole paragraph says.
Sure, sorry, it's split on 2 pages.
Okay, so you have to sell to a related agency, which is one that owns
Half of the,
half of it.
half of the membership interest of the other organization, or. and I'll
So would
pull that
this
again.
be like the United Way of Central Vermont and the Montpelier United Way office? Or the Barry United Way office, and they decided to merge, but they kept the offices, or more likely the financial assets?
If they have 50% or more of the membership interest, I suppose, if that meets that qualification, or if one organization appoints or elects 50% of or more of the other organization's governing body, so having control,
Visual.
sort of like a parent organization that has at least half of that
Okay, so
control.
that might be the United Way or Kiwanis. Any organization that is the Vermont. And then you had chapters in a number of towns. The larger organization would have to have, but everybody in that smaller that chapter would probably also be a member of the state chapter.
And so if you have the United Way of Vermont,
Right.
if there is such a thing, and it merges with United Way of Washington County, this big one would perhaps meet that 50% test,
Right.
and then now it's merged. Then 2 years later, it merges with the United Way of Addison County. The same 50% would presumably apply.
Yeah.
And what I'm just trying to understand is what does this have to do with whether or not the transfer of either of any of that is taxable?
Well, I think,
I mean, maybe I'm missing something, I just don't get it.
see, that's one sale. The other one is the camps and they sell out to Hotel International. So I think it may be put in there that it's, the minute you do a for-profit sale to a for-profit, I would assume that that sale becomes taxable.
Well, it just says notwithstanding, the first subdivision, if that purchase, the initial purchaser who bought the exempt property, exempt from property transfer tax, within 5 years transfers any portion of that same tax, it doesn't say to whom, but if it were back to a related organization, it would be exempt. So the assumption is that if it were to a non-exempt, non-related organization, and whether it's for-profit or another nonprofit, just not a related nonprofit, then it would be taxable to the transferee, so the original purchaser for the first transaction, but whoever is buying the property would be paying that second transaction tax. So I also wanted to clarify that original purchaser wouldn't be paying both of the taxes, they'd within that
The
5 years.
first and the third, all right.
The next buyer would pay the
It's like
second
property transfer.
transaction.
But, so the first purchaser though is making the second sale.
Right.
So they know when they price their thing that they are going to owe that tax, very similar to property transfer. You may exempt it once, but not twice. And I'm assuming that that this language is there now, related, that the tax is due if one related nonprofit sells to another related nonprofit, that right now the tax is due.
Yeah, there's
So
no
what-
specific exemption.
Yeah, so the thing is to nonprofits, they get to sell once without paying transfer tax unless they sell again within 5 years.
That's a question.
Yeah.
So do we have a history of entities trying to use these transfers in order to avoid taxation, to move it to somebody that has a better tax status for a sale?
Not that I'm aware of. My understanding was that this was added in like a bit of a belt and suspenders way to mirror the way that other transfer laws written in the Internal Revenue Code. Kind of, trying to cross the Ts and dot the Is, but I think that Senator Brock's asking really great questions about it. We're open to amending for sure.
I don't understand it, the rationale behind it. I mean, maybe there's a purpose.
Did
I
this,
think to avoid the hypothetical was like perhaps then that second entity, the purchaser who didn't have to pay property transfer tax, will then transfer the property through another mechanism that isn't this one, which will also be tax-free to a for-profit entity. Because this is one exemption, there are other exemptions of property transfer tax code. I'm not sure if there was a specific scenario in mind, we're just trying to make sure we are doing this responsibly.
okay, so this was from the tax department. Was
Correct.
this majorly adjusted in the other body?
No, this was unadjusted in the other body.
Okay,
So if someone asked me why we did, I think I would say, because we're supporting we're making it easier for not-for-profits to evolve, transfer properties, merge, whatever, because we're removing, at least temporarily, a tax obligation in order to facilitate that. But if it turns out, well, it becomes just a commercial transaction, then we say, okay, well, now you're kind of out of that business, you're selling land for commercial reasons, so then we tax it.
They're exploiting this loophole in order to minimize their tax obligation to a separate entity. They're trying to guard against that.
okay, but what, we are also putting them on par with corporations when they merge.
Right, like a corporation reorganizing wouldn't have to worry about their potential property transfer tax liability because of an exemption that exists. And we
Okay,
wanted to
so-
create a situation where nonprofits reorganizing or,
Yeah, you're
Blending.
well, United Way absorbs, United Way of Vermont absorbs the United Way of Central Vermont, but then Burlington decides it wants its own United Way, and it can, these things move. And you don't want, they are in a way of reorganization. They're,
I mean, most of the time when I've seen reorganizations of nonprofits, it's because the smaller organization, like the chapter, is unable to stay in business, support itself. It doesn't have the resources, and so it merges into a larger organization.
right.
And it's not infrequent that I've seen that with charitable organizations I've been involved, happen several times in the state, certainly at a regional level and also at a state level. But that was just my question, is if this is designed to, in effect, support nonprofits, why you would put that limitation in? Now, if
Maybe,
you put the limitation in solely to protect state revenues or something, that would be a logical
Yeah.
reason. But I just haven't heard a reason yet.
well, I think it's
Yeah,
to prevent the selling of the lakefront, we all merged to the Hotels International. But since
That's up.
these other things are there, the no tax unless the commissioner determines that it's for the purpose of tax avoidance. Why couldn't we just say that on the third, or say unless it's a sale to a for-profit? And if it's a sale, if it's a sale to a third not-for-profit, then unless the commissioner determines, and then say if it's due to a for-profit within 5 years.
You would simply say sales between not-for-profit organizations, related not-for-profit organizations are exempt from tax. From the tax on the transfer. That would be straightforward and understandable.
Yeah, so I think that the C sub I achieves that, and then achieves that cleanly, and then we're wondering about the merits of that double I. And one thought I think I've heard circulating here is that perhaps we could add that same language to the second part that says, unless the commissioner determines that this is not for the purpose of tax avoidance,
That would be fine.
or, yeah.
Okay, so that,
Before it
you have the
works,
negative,
yeah.
you're gonna pay it unless the commissioner decides it's not for the purpose of tax avoidance. Because there's
That's a
some
double
You
pretty,
should ask the lawyer
Yeah.
if they like that.
there's some pretty
Stated.
fancy, wealthy, not-for-profits out there.
Would you also like to just add, and I know it's more words, maybe a little more complicated, but just also make it clear that if it were again between related organizations, it would still be exempt even if it were a second transfer? I think that's implied
Yeah.
already in one, but it might make sense
I
to
think
reiterate that.
that we might, okay, yes,
We're gonna be stuck on this pretty afternoon.
Does tax run a shot clock on transactions, so this on numerous other types as well?
Well, there's the big shot clock I'm thinking of is the statute of limitations, which allows us to look back 3 years for most tax types. So actually another edit here is reducing the window to 3 years so the commissioner could do something about that first transaction within the statute of limitations.
Rebecca, do you and Abby have an idea what we want? I think we want to have some flexibility with that third transfer. And a second transfer, yes, it's the third block. I'm visualizing. So, yeah, we want to have, if it's just, the United Way of Vermont is now merging with the United Way of Chittenden County and then the United Way of, but
Those are still.
yeah, that, as long as it's not for tax avoidance, the commissioner can forgive it. But if there is a third sale, within that, well, you wanna do within the 3-year window, so you could,
That's fine, 3 years.
It's still just the
3-year
second.
window that the commissioner determines is for tax avoidance, then the tax is due. Does that work? Okay,
I think this is an
You probably
improvement.
spent enough time on this.
we can always come back and use the notwithstand words and
I just sent a note
Whatever.
to Senator Bray. This is, again, another prime example of Arkansas law of triviality.
Okay, well, that's why this is not controversial, because this is, as these things go, somewhat trivial. We have done some really controversial things on miscellaneous tax, so,
I have
Yes.
questions, just for scale, I can't see what I can't see. How many sections are there in miscellaneous tax? Between 16? Oh, not bad. Okay, if you're gonna say 47, then I was gonna get a little worried. Okay.
okay.
Like trips.
And I've got a couple, depending on if we get the Barry tip bill or if we don't. Depending on if that's a viable bill or not, the veggie sunset needs to be extended this year. It ends July 1st, so it's my intention, this probably has the best, this has to make it through. So I think that's where I'll put it. I know the Ways and Means doesn't want to kill veggie. Other things on that bill I'm not so sure about. I know I've asked and no, they don't want it to cease, so.
So that, regarding amendments for this, with S94, I was appointed to BEPC earlier this session, and so I've become a point person for them, and so what's coming over from S94, I have like 7 things, and I'm really hoping for committee discussion, but I'm just worried about
As
the
soon as
time.
we get it, we will discuss it. I don't know what's on there, and if it is in fact on the floor now, they're not on the floor, the light's not on. There could be amendments, so I want to wait and see what actually shows up here. And then we will decide what is viable
The other thing
to
is,
send back.
just the 2 other things on there, definitely veggie, but I really want Hartford to get their tip extension, and then the berries.
Yes, I would like all of those to go.
Use.
And we could send it back and concur with further proposal of amendment. Yeah.
What is the status right now of the tip?
It is sitting, well, it may be on the floor today. They merged the Barry and Hartford TIFs. I've been told the salt agreement went on it. The veggie sunset, but there were apparently a bunch of changes to veggie. I don't know what else was on there.
So I have a list of 7
Okay.
things on there. So they added a lot. So they put a ton on there. So the reason why I raised it, I don't want to see the Hartford tip extension
Right.
not happen. Do you want to add that to the miscellaneous so it's in the mix on that?
Yeah, he voted those, they voted those. We'll just
Okay.
stick them on if that's the only viable. If we can strip out whatever amendments we haven't had time to work through and send veggie back and they'll concur, or send the bill back and they'll concur, that's fine. They have a lot more problems suspending the rules over there. The Senate is usually very helpful, usually. But they usually aren't very helpful in the other body, so they have more difficulty with that, and we will assess that when the time comes. Because there's a lot of big bills in play right now, including the housing bill. Okay, okay,
There's still a few other.
yes, let's do the child, okay, care credit,
I'm gonna pull back up this section by section. I think that's just the most efficient way to
okay.
look at these changes, and then I'll swap back over if you'd like to look at the amendment language. Because section 12, pass out of the House, it does it has two changes to the child and dependent care credits. This is an income tax credit that's for expenses paid to enable someone to work or to look for work for children and dependents. And
And we upped
changed it last year.
the state's share. You get the federal, and we upped it to where we equaled. You used to get something like 30% of the federal, or,
There were two different,
yeah,
depending on the income, and it's now 172% of the federal credit.
yeah. So we upped that significantly as part of we gave tax credits to everybody last year. We removed the child tax credit to pay for the child care bill primarily. Well, we needed money to get us into when we can start collecting the tax on our bill. The House is adamant that, and I think we've agreed that credit, the child tax credit will remain a refundable tax credit, and we will not have the parental leave on the child care bill. That's the one thing I'm clear that they want. This is another one.
So this is not the child tax.
This one is not at play.
So these are slightly more technical changes, although there is some policy thrown in here as well. So it does make it clear that it's both for residents or part-year residents, because
Okay.
that's what is allowed for the child tax credit. It also, so last session, there were some requirements about the type of care that was provided. Those were struck, but one requirement was retained that the care must be provided in Vermont, and this bill would remove that requirement. So that would
Okay,
work for folks who have care that is provided in another state, so especially for
but we have
People live on the
a
border.
lot of border areas.
so that is removed. That will no longer be a limiting factor. What is added in that does limit the amount of the credit somewhat is for part-year residents who are earning income while they're living outside of Vermont. So it's in the case of someone who's either moving into or moving out of Vermont. In the period of time that they're a resident of somewhere outside of Vermont, their total income will be compared to the amount of income that they've earned in Vermont. So that will reduce their credit proportionally to how much income they earned in Vermont.
Okay,
So
so the
that-
credit is proportional.
Correct, but to the amount of income that they're actually earning while they're living in Vermont.
Okay,
So that change, that I'm calling it sort of a phase out of the amount of credit, that change was made by the House in the child and dependent care credit. The tax department had identified this as a way that the earned income tax credit and the child tax credit and then this child and dependent care credit were not identical language in statute. So
we even had a phase out.
Well, so the earned income tax credit has a similar phase out, but it's
Okay.
not identical language. So the
Okay.
child and dependent care credit, as you just saw that language,
But so this just, it gets the same phase out for everyone.
correct.
Okay.
So the change here that would be in your first instance of amendment is to strike on lines 15 and 17, that it's earned income when you're looking at the earned income tax credit. So it just lines up the language across these three different tax credits.
Okay. So these are technical changes.
Yeah, this one's very technical. So it's the same phase out and it would be using the same types of income to determine how much the credit's reduced. So that's the first.
Okay, so we've got 3 phase outs and it's on
Three different credits.
3 different credits, and this just gets them all on the same schedule and language.
Yes.
Okay. So it's income, not earned income. So if you've got a trust fund and you're drawing it down, okay. All right,
The next two changes, I actually brought to your attention, Madam Chair, as more technical changes. And it was, and I apologize for not noticing this while S45 was in your committee, but looking at the rate that would be applied in S45 to the pass-through entity, the state and local tax deduction cap workaround bill is proposing to use the second highest marginal rate for personal income tax as that pass-through entity tax rate. And when I went to check what that is, the reasoning behind proposing that was to have it be the same rate that pass-throughs pay when they have non-resident members. So pass-throughs can currently pay as an entity when they have a non-resident or multiple
Where
non-resident
is-
members. I'm sorry, so let me go back up.
I'm looking at my side-by-side, is,
Oh, I'm sorry, the section by section is only the as passed House version. I haven't
okay, so
created an-
we are adding, this we're adding in.
Yes, so this would be new
Okay.
language that did not come out of the House, and then
Okay,
you would be adding in as a technical
we
change.
don't have a middle, because we
no
only
longer
have
a middle,
4.
exactly. There used to be 5, but part of the Vermont response to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act changes at the federal level was to move from 5 income tax rates and brackets down to 4. So having statute refer to the middle marginal rate, there's no longer a middle marginal rate. So the way the composite rate has been administered for S corporations and partnerships is to keep it at that rate that was being charged when there was a middle rate, but statute doesn't actually line up to that.
Okay.
So this just
It's a
crosses out.
technical.
It's technical, it's very, sorry for the length.
You can't get 2.5 or, yeah, in there,
So
okay.
it would go from middle to second highest. And so that wouldn't be a change in terms of the actual rate that partnerships, LLCs, and S corporations are currently paying.
Okay, we're getting our next group in here, so.
Okay, I can go a little faster. I was
That's
not planning
okay.
on walking you through the bond bank language. So
Okay,
that's
and this is
outside of my area.
VHFA's next,
And
right?
you have seen all of that. So
Yes.
I will take you,
And
so
that
that's the
allows them to
extent of-
just reissue their restricted residential units every 10 years, okay?
So falling back up, so that's the extent of the amendment as it exists right now. I'll add in what the committee has discussed.
And then we've got the filing deadline, which we're moving to March, right?
Yes, did you want me to walk through quickly the VHFA extension or?
Really quick, since they're sitting in the room.
So currently there is a process by which VHFA has certificates for certain rent controlled housing. These properties are able to have a slightly more preferential valuation for property tax purposes. The way statute is written, the VHFA can only renew the certificate once in a 10-year period. This change would allow that to continue on. It wouldn't change any of the requirements for those properties to qualify. So it just allows VHFA to continue to provide certificates so these properties can be.
Okay, which gives them some discount, I'm assuming, on their property taxes because they are charging lower than market rent.
Yes, there's quite a few different qualifications that the properties have to meet. So VHFA certifies that they meet all of those eligibility requirements. Okay. The next 2 sections have to do with the property tax credit. The first is that it would require plain language notices about the property tax credit to be sent
This
by
is the
towns.
controversial one.
So it would be a new, currently there is sort of a catch-all if towns find that providing notices in every tax bill to, including delinquent notices to homestead taxpayers, if they find that their mailing envelopes, et cetera, would not fit the notice, then they don't have to send it. This, the proposal as it came out of the House would strike that discretion given to towns, so they would be required to always send a notice about the property tax credit to all homestead taxpayers.
Thank you. I just wanted to update the committee on this provision. You might remember that Carol Dawes from the Vermont Municipal Clerks and Treasurers Association came in with some testimony on this, and she had I thought an interesting recommendation here which was for tax to rewrite the language that's already required on the back of the property tax bill. It's called the bill backer. And we took that to heart and actually did it already. It's already posted for the property tax bills that'll be going out for the coming fiscal year in July. I think that we were successful in increasing the readability and clarity about the property tax credit eligibility and filing deadlines. So I just want to say that this wasn't one that was pitched from the tax department, and we kind of agree with her assessment that this would be a little redundant with the bill backer. I just want to let you guys know we've made those updates.
So we can strike that because it's no longer necessary because the tax department is rewritten the back of the bill back or the back of the bill.
I feel like that would be a
and
fine
put it in
direction to
English.
go.
Okay, so we'll strike 14. Okay.
Only two more sections. This is really the last section.
Yeah.
Other than the effective dates. So this section extends when individuals have to file their property tax credit claims. Currently, the requirement is at the time of filing an income tax return, and then if individuals are late, they have until October 15th to file a property tax credit claim, and that's a hard deadline. You cannot claim a property tax credit after that. This language would extend that to the following March 15th, so almost a full year after the initial deadline. There would still be a penalty charge, so there would be a $150 late filing penalty charge. The credits would go directly to the claimant, so there would not be the town having to reissue a property tax bill, and it would come directly from the state, so towns would not be involved.
And everybody loved it, and this came from the taxpayer ombudsman or
Yes, taxpayer advocate, I think it's
advocate in the tax department that just saw so many of these. So we are changing the deadline. But if you file after October 15th and before March 15th, you get charged. We will send it to you. We don't reduce your bill. We just send you the difference. And thanks everybody say if you do it 2 years in a row, we don't.
That is not in the language
I
currently.
know, see how that works out. Okay,
And then the final section would be replaced with the bond bank language, and then the effective dates would be repeated in your amendment.
okay, so committee, are we good with this? We need to get language for what happens if somebody does collect a whole lot of local option tax they're not supposed to. And then, that transfer tax, we need to do a little tightening up on that one. It looks like we don't need 14 anymore if that's been done. And I think we're good to go on this until,
Would you like me to work with on the TIF language as well?
yes, we talked about there's a certain amount of angst in the communities about mini TIFs. Some discussion about putting a study on there. We'll have to figure out who. And I don't want to just look at mini TIFs. I want to look at possible ways to help communities deal with infrastructure needs. So there might be other ways the state could help. It's primarily water, sewer, maybe it's street lights, but water and sewer seem to be the big ones. Upgrades to the wastewater plant, upgrades to your wells.
I'm hearing that there's some language in S94 that they like on this, so I'm wondering if, as a belt and suspenders approach, if S94,
What is this? Oh,
so that's the very TIF thing, so they put this TIF, project-based TIF study language in S94.
okay, well, we're still waiting to get that one back. When we get that one back, then we can make a decision. If it's just transferring the language over, it's easy. They just need to get it to us. It was on the floor today. I was told it was. All right. Okay, thank you. Now we're back. Beth St. James is here. Is Beth here?
That's me.
Ah, that's you, okay. Okay, Beth, we have only heard from Barbara Brody, this morning. And I gather there's two moving pieces. One is a fairly large amount of money in the budget to purchase an automobile for foster students, most of whom in Chittenden County are living in shelters, which I find extremely disturbing, but they don't have a car and so they can't get, but the thing this committee is looking at is, after I think they had voted it out in appropriations, the chair of appropriations said, there's a $200,000 appropriation from the ed fund for some pilot drivers ed program. We'd already voted out the yield bill. I gather we can do this and we will just have less money on the bottom line to reduce taxes next year, and that, what did we end up, 16 million or
In the
18?
tax rate.
Yeah.
So we go to joint fiscal office, 13 million.
13, so we would have 12 something. My concern, from the little I've heard, is that this pilot program is going to in some way subsidize the cost of driver's ed to some schools. I know from long experience that no school likes paying for driver's ed. We made them, it's an unfunded mandate. And if we are going to subsidize some schools in any way, we're gonna have a hard time not subsidizing all schools. And I would like, just coming out of universal meals, that was a 1 year. I'm a little concerned about doing that until this committee has really had a time to look at it. So I may be reading it totally wrong. I'm gonna leave it to you and tell us what this really does before we make a decision.
Sure, Beth St. James, Office of Legislative Counsel. So we're talking about H 461, the Senate's proposal of amendment that has, I think, was skipped over on the floor today.
Okay, and this got put on, yeah, it did at my request.
Yep.
So is this in the House bill? The 200,000?
This is in H 461,
Yeah,
and it was added by the Senate.
okay. All right, that makes things easier. Okay,
So, do you want me to share my screen? I assume we're only talking about the driver's ed section.
yes, I don't wanna look at all the rest of it.
Okay, do you want me to share my screen?
Sure.
Okay. Oh no, do I have a? I do, bear with me. So we're gonna skip all the way down. Don't look.
And all the motion says like this. They're gonna have bigger problems than this with the House if they crossed out all those sections. There it is, pilot program.
Okay, so section 8 was added as part of Senate Education's strike-all amendment to H 461. It creates a pilot program, so I think this is not a lot of language, I think we should just read it. So on or before December 15th of this year, AOE and the Department of Motor Vehicles in partnership with interested school districts, shall establish a regional pilot student driver clinic program to provide the required minimum 6 hours of behind-the-wheel instruction by a certified driver education instructor. And those 6 hours are required by state board rule as part of driver's ed. AOE and DMV shall appoint one or more certified driver education instructors to assist in the development of the pilot program, which shall be designed to be implemented on a regional level with an adequate number of programs provided to meet the reasonably anticipated needs of all public and approved independent schools participating in the pilot program.
And independence, all right.
The agency and DMV shall partner with participating school districts to define regions. Pilot program has to meet all the legal requirements of driver's ed programs. AOE and DMV shall adopt policies, procedures, and guidelines necessary to implement it. And the actual behind the wheel student time, the programs need to be stood up by July 15th, 2024. Then there's a series of reporting requirements. So December of this year, AOE has to submit a written report to the General Assembly on the progress in developing the pilot program, implementation plan for the clinics, and also an update on the certification process for driver education teachers and the steps the agency has taken to address the workforce shortage, and then any recommended legislative action. And then in January 2025, AOE has to submit another written report with the results of the pilot program and any recommendations for expansion, as well as any modifications necessary or the resources necessary. And then there is the appropriation. So it's coming out of the Ed Fund, $200,000 fiscal year 2024 for the purposes of developing the regional pilot project. And then prior to using the funds appropriated under the subsection, AOE has to consult the Vermont State Highway Safety Office on whether the student driver clinic program is eligible for federal highway safety grant funds. And that is it.
Regionally,
Yes.
how many regions? I'm assuming if kids have to drive and it's in the winter, we're talking maybe 8, at least 6.
So as you all know, there's AOE and then there's supervisory unions, and those supervisory unions may have one school district or they have many school districts. So this language as drafted does not use either the school district level or the supervisory union level. It uses the term region, and then right here we have AOE and DMV shall partner with participating school districts to define
What
what
does
regions
to
are.
partner mean?
I'm sorry?
What does to partner mean?
They're running this program jointly.
What?
They're running the program together.
Is the
They
agency-
collaborating?
Yes.
Well, then why don't we use that word?
I
I'm sorry.
Are they
This is a-
Are they
This is
putting money
noisy.
in? Is the Agency of Transportation putting money in here?
This language does not contemplate that, no.
Then they aren't partnering. They may be consulting. Okay. My concern is 200,000 this year for one region. That's, you figure at least, how many supervisory union districts do we have?
Oh, I don't know that answer off the top of my head, but this language actually does not limit the number of regions.
No, that's what I mean, and we just added 3 cents to the property tax rate with school meals. That will no longer show, it just is gonna be money off the top. If we do this and the money goes in, that will be money off the top, whereas right now schools have to put driver's ed in their budget.
Correct.
And I think it's a good idea, but I'm just not comfortable at this point, and we'll have Ted from Agency of Education, see if we can convince us. it's a good thing, there's lots of good things, but we're affording a lot of them. Okay,
What's the connection with, I'm sure, between this and the shortage of driver's ed teachers?
I don't know that I'm the person to answer that
yeah,
question.
she just drafts what they tell her.
If I could try.
Yeah.
So my understanding is kids, that are in one school, right now, they have to wait till there's an opening in their DMV, their driver's ed
Right.
school. This would provide some regional relief so that they could provide some additional training at schools that kids trying to take driver's ed that aren't getting it in their school district, they could do this.
So you think,
Regionally.
there's nothing here that says that the schools must continue to provide driver's ed. That's knowing how the schools feel about driver's ed. It was apparently, before my time, one of the first things we required them to do. That requirement, I doubt, given the pressure on school budgets, that any school would be providing driver's ed if we had anywhere near a different. He said, I am not voting in it. You got the two, we did the two charters, yes.
Perfect.
That's it.
Awesome, thank you.
Just to add on to that, is that there's a lot of backlog, so there's just no spots, and some kids are waiting till they're 17, almost to the point where they're 18, and then they're getting their license without taking driver's ed, and I think we have worse drivers in the road from the pandemic and otherwise. Those are the arguments.
Where have you been driving?
What do you mean?
The worst drivers in the road. You've never driven in downtown Boston. have
Oh,
you?
yeah, terrible there.
I used to do it every day.
They're the
It's
worst.
amazing how nasty it gets.
My father's theory was that New York drivers were so nice by comparison because the traffic was so bad, there was nothing to be gained by being as aggressive as a.
No, I got hit 3 times while I was sitting still in traffic. It doesn't bother them. I think I understand that, but I just feel this committee needs to know the possible impact on property tax rates, given the likelihood that once we allow schools in out, they're gonna take it. And if we want to socialize this, if we really want to partner, then maybe we should have some AOT money in there, except we know that there is no money in AOT to take. Maybe there is the governor's highway safety council or somebody else, some federal program has some money, but I don't know. So do we have any questions for Beth, and we'll get Ted up from the agency, and then I don't know what you can tell me.
Just here if you have any ed fund questions.
This is also, have we ever, I don't know, you, Senator McDonald, have we ever done this kind of a thing with ed fund money? Where we signed up to do,
I can't recall, but we may have.
I can't, yeah,
Give a fair answer.
yeah, I don't know. So Ted, do you want to come up? Talk to us?
Absolutely. For the record, Ted Fisher, Vermont Agency of Education, the agency's Director of Communications and Legislative Affairs. And Madam Chair, I was just racking my brain. This is certainly my first time in the Senate Finance in chair this year. I think it may have been my first time in the chair in Senate Finance ever.
I think it might be. I've seen you in some forums, but maybe we'll have the committee introduce themselves. You know us?
I do know every senator here. If you
Okay.
don't mind, then I think you asked some good questions that I think I can speak to. So if you don't mind, I'll jump in. But I have
Jump in.
been in the room with my former boss, Secretary French, who plays a role in this story,
Do
having
you
been
have
part
your
of this.
secretary?
We do not. The appointment process for the Secretary of Education has a step involving the State Board of Education, and I don't know what the status of that, but we have are in the very able hands of Interim Secretary Boucher, and expect to be so until after adjournment, as that process works through. So I understand, and I'm probably not the best person to speak to some of the most important details that the committee is going today in terms of the cost and ed fund impact, although I have a couple of thoughts about your last question, Madam Chair. But what I am happy to speak to is the intent and purpose and sort of the genesis of this bill. So this started a couple of months ago when your colleagues in the Education Committee were interested, we're hearing about some of the backlogs that the senator from Chittenden Southeast mentioned in various parts of the state with driver's education. This has been something that's been sort of exacerbated by the pandemic, but there's also a shortage of driver educators in Vermont. And there's actually two different types of driver educator certifications. Many driver educators hold both. One is done by DMV. One is an educator license issued by the agency. And that is why there's a partnership going on in sort of tending to the driver educator space between us and the DMV. DMV regulates the private system. We license the educators.
My first question, how is this going to help the shortage of educators? And what are we doing? I mean, is the goal to do away with the backlog? Or is the goal for the state essentially to take over all or a portion of the driver's ed program?
So the answer is the former, which is to try to address the shortfall. So the question you just asked is exactly the question that your colleagues asked in education. And the answer, this program doesn't fully answer the question, but there are several other things that are going on as we speak, things that we're doing with DMV, conversations that we're having, some work that is being done among the driver educator community to try to address some of the other areas. And I'm happy to go into as much detail, as little detail as you like. It's not operative on exactly this program, but essentially what they asked, is there something that we can legislate? How can we help through legislation this year? And Secretary French's answer was one of the gaps that we have. We have an educator pipeline problem. We're talking to those state colleges about trying to bring an educator prep program back for driver education to Vermont. We're looking at some things around licensing rules and things that might smooth the pathway in. We're looking at potential to allow educators who are not driver educators to offer some of the classroom portions in places where school districts just don't have a driver educator, or the driver educator that they have, they're spread thin in some SUs. They don't have enough staffing. So we're looking at various approaches, all of which were not sort of easily legislated this year. And so when the committee asked, how can we help, Secretary French said, the big problem that we have in some regions of the state is the practical, is the on-the-road experience. So students are required to take 6 hours of on-the-road experience with a driver educator in order to pass the class and be able to sit for their license. And so the goal, former Secretary French has had some experience, I believe, with the DMV has some popular motorcycle clinics where you can sort of go and do your motorcycle endorsement in a weekend type of thing. And so he was thinking, could we perhaps figure out a way to do the driver portion in a shorter time period in a regional basis, and essentially make the best use of our available driver educators and basically bring students to them on a regional basis rather than having them work in the classroom. And there are some details that need to be worked out there, and Senate Education dug into some of those and backed away. That's why there are 2 reports. Also, some of the workforce items I mentioned a minute ago are reflected in one of those reports you'll see. There's some rules and regulations in the State Board of Education's rules about driver educator that we may need to change or adapt, essentially to allow students to do more classroom or more practical work per unit time. Because right now they usually do 1 hour per week, and you have a driver educator who's doing essentially driving all day and then teaching. And the goal here would be to try to have more students get their practical hours done in a quicker amount of time.
Okay, none of that tells me where the $200,000 is going.
The $200,000 is intended to help the agency and the Department of Motor Vehicles. And my understanding is that some of that may go to administrative costs, but the goal is really to try to pilot this. Sorry?
We just upped all the DMV fees, they should be flush.
And I unfortunately can't speak to their budget. I know that this was our assessment between Commissioner Minoli and Secretary French as to what might be workable to try to pilot this regionally. And that's an important thing, is this is not the cost of the program statewide. The goal would be to see if this is functional.
No, see, if you say a pilot, that means we're intending, if it works, it will continue. That's an ongoing problem. That is not a short-term problem to get us over a COVID-induced lack of teachers or backlog. If it were a one-time investment, but no school, once the state takes responsibility for, I mean, we've got a shortage of all kinds of teachers.
I absolutely agree.
And so we're taking the thing that schools hate most, but why wouldn't we start doing regional math classes? You know, I mean, we have done that. I think before we're finished with this, we'll be into the millions. And I'm just hesitant, since we just picked up universal meals, to start another program that will have some pretty major impacts on the ed fund.
I absolutely understand. I
I
think,
mean, if we could say, you get $200,000 this year, and I don't even want to bet on the state of the ed fund next year. When, you know, sales are leveling off and they're gonna be dropping. We're out of the boom. I'm concerned about taking on another, what could be a massive program, so.
I absolutely understand that. And I'm not an attorney, so I look to be corrected by Beth. Our goal really is to do the work that would be necessary to see if this even addresses the problem. As mentioned, your colleagues were concerned about whatever actions we could potentially take to assist with this issue. And you're absolutely right. It may be that the shortfall, that the shortage of educators and sort of the COVID impacts smooth out and this isn't needed. It also may be that unfortunately we don't have enough driver educators going into the future, or it
We
might
don't
be,
have enough of any kind of teacher right now.
or this may also be a more cost-effective way to do driver education. And so it might be that the costs are higher at the state, but remember, we're talking about salaries and benefits at the local level, which right now we aren't paying in some cases because we don't have enough educators. So school districts are talking about, we need to hire more drivers. You know,
Yeah, but
that's kind of
the
the,
state will hire them.
and I am not Brad James, and we're not talking about hiring driver educators. We don't have enough driver educators at the state. Like, I'll just be honest, if the state tried to hire driver educators, we probably wouldn't get applications. We don't get enough.
So who's paying salaries of the driver educators?
The goal would be, I mean, the details still would need to be worked out. And that's why we're talking about a year to work this out and report back to Senate Education next
Okay,
fall.
so if we worked it out for a year and we got a better idea of
My
what we were
sense,
doing, we wouldn't have to appropriate the $200,000.
that's what I'm not clear on, because we asked for the appropriation. I think that there will be some expenditures this year. I'm not sure, the program wouldn't be operating until the following school year. We are in a, my assumption, not being an expert in this area, but my assumption is that the actual driver educators would be employed by their school district. We might pay for time or something like that, but we're not talking about hiring. We're talking about administrative costs.
You're talking about Saturday clinics. You're gonna get a unionized teacher to come in and work straight time and the school board's going to pay them on Saturday.
And that's where I think we're probably talking about paying, hours worth of time, to compensate people for coming into work and participate in the clinic. We're not talking about adding an FTE.
No, we're not talking about hiring them, but we're talking about contracting with them.
Right, and the other costs would be setting up, finding a venue that's, a lot of driver education occurs on city streets. We might be finding a venue. I know that some of the motorcycle education clinics take place at airports or airfields or other locations. And so those kind of things are things that people who are much closer to this area with that technical expertise would be figuring out over the next year as contemplated in the language you have before you. I'm no Brad James, but certainly.
None of us are Brad.
But one thing we do think about is what are sort of the hidden costs because they're done in budget versus what are costs that are on top of it. But there's other examples. Universal meals that you just dealt with is one example of we decided to fund it at the state level, but there are others using more flexible pathways, grants, and things like that. So we don't
get
see
about $100,000 worth of outside money to generate. That's probably close to $500,000 to generate
we don't
the
think of
momentum that
this as
some of these programs have had.
We don't think of this as inconsistent in terms of use of the ed fund, but I'm sensitive to your concerns about cost and the out years and things like that.
I'm concerned about, yes, once the state says we, not the local districts, are responsible, that we will be responsible. And that's gonna be a lot more than $200,000. And that I find concerning because it's gonna blow the property tax rates. And I'd like, given that we just picked up universal meals, and there's a child care out there and a whole lot of talk about 4-year-olds going into the school system. I'm just cautious.
I think a lot of the questions, and you touched upon it in your comments there, and maybe you can come back to this, but where did the $200,000 figure come from? And then you said there might be some information out there about what your previous secretary, Dan French, had in mind with that $200,000. I think that would dispel a lot of concern.
Unfortunately, I don't have access to Secretary French because he's since departed state service.
Yes.
My understanding is that some conversations have occurred. There were some conversations prior to session about whether or not this would be something that would be workable. And it was sort of an idea we had in the hopper, right? I don't know if you decide not to pass this section this year, it may be something that we pursue and do some of the planning work on and come back to next year.
Sounds like you could do an awful lot of the planning work and the analysis.
It was something that we didn't include in our budget request. Sorry to
Right.
cut you off, Madam Chair, but we didn't include in our budget request. It wasn't something that the governor put forward as a priority,
Right.
but it was something where when your colleagues asked what could be done in this issue, we had something that we had a rough idea at the very least of what could be done and also a cost estimate for what it would need to do to pilot the program. So
Okay.
That's kind of where it comes from. And I do think, our commitment is that we're gonna continue to work on this issue as we're working on all workforce issues and doing everything we can do absent. You have some additional appropriations contemplated in the budget for some educator workforce issues, which we appreciate. And we'll obviously continue to do what we can do through either working with the regulatory structure or with things like peer review and looking at this. And some of those driver's ed issues we're going to continue doing regardless.
Okay. Committee, any questions? Comments? Thoughts? Am I a lone wolf or is anyone else sharing
I don't know what we're buying for $200,000.
Okay. It's, I know, it's Monday and it's late, you're enjoying it too much, Senator. I think I will talk with Senator Campion. He was concerned about it bogging the bill down, but if this is a Senate amendment, it's not going to bog the House down from concurring. It might, if it's in there, it might bog the House down further. I'd like to see it a little more fleshed out would be mine, but I need, you know, if I stand up and ask to have it removed from the bill, I'd like to be able to say my committee supports that. Yes, thumbs up, thumbs down.
Yes, take that out.
Yeah,
You're not talking about changing anything, just remove it.
we'll take it out. Yeah, everything else in miscellaneous ed goes through. This one, I'd like to take a little, once you start, it's really hard to take it back. And, you know,
Leaving the foster care money though, right? The foster care, the $200,000.
that's not in here. All the foster kid money is in the budget. That's buying cars. That's not this money. This money's going to everybody. Senator Hinsdale, you have joined us. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, and you know, I feel I'll take some responsibility that, you know, Barbara and a few other folks came to me early in the session and said, and just because they knew me as a Chittenden County senator, and then kind of said, it feels like this issue's falling between the cracks of economic development, education, and transportation. Like, who's responsible for driver's ed if it's not in a good place? And you know, I hear from King Street Youth Center and a lot of other folks that work with youth and with young at-risk folks that there's not enough driver's ed, and unless you're, you know, independently wealthy or your parents can pay for lessons or can do this themselves, a lot of kids are missing out on driver's ed, and it's hurting them in the job market and in their sort of independence, et cetera. So I will take responsibility that, you know, I kind of left this off with Senator Perchlik in transportation and Senator Campion, and thought, come back to me when there's like a solution. But I hope we can look at this in a concerted, systematic way next year, because I get not wanting to just sprinkle money places. I get that from an equity perspective. I just don't know how to solve the systemic issue that we're just not doing a great job with driver's ed in the state, and it's really harming young people.
We're doing a great job with a lot of things because of teacher shortages. The whole thing though, for the kids that aren't in school, that can't take driver ed, which is probably a lot of your King Street places, that's going through, that's in the budget. So
Right.
That's
Yeah.
not getting hit by this.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I think, I mean, it just seems like the schools are kind of pushing off driver's ed more and more.
We never
to
wanted
their
it.
programs.
And they've been very clear about that on numerous occasions in my experience.
Right. So, I mean, I'm glad that there's part of it's going through. I'll just make sure that I include you, Senator Cummings, in the beginning of the discussion next year.
Okay.
If it does become an ed fund question.
Yeah, but the ed fund, yeah. The education committee can do great things, but we have to pay for it. So there's always tension. And I've sat in the chair in both of them. There's always tension.
Right.
And that's a good thing. Makes us work things out. Okay. Anybody else want to join in? I have your permission to ask that we remove that section and.
The whole section or just the appropriation?
Oh, just the appropriation. Can you draft that for
It's
me?
already drafted.
Okay.
Would you, just you?
Yeah,
Just ask a question though, by removing the appropriation, it still leaves in the concept of creating these things at a regional level. And I think that's an underlying question that we haven't resolved. And I would suggest that the entire thing be removed at this point.
I don't want to stop them from working
Maybe I can clarify what I said. I don't, and I apologize, I cannot say one way or the other. But I believe that we were intending to spend some, if not a good portion of that money this year on some of the administrative work to stand up the program, even with the extended deadline. So I don't know if we can proceed, and that would be something that is also a question between both the agency and
Yeah, well,
DMP.
I don't know that we want you to proceed until we have decided if,
So,
I
so
think,
wearing my general AOE hat,
Yeah.
I would, if you don't want to fund it, I would request that the section be struck. Understanding that we will continue to work on these kind of issues.
yeah, the issue is
Right.
there. This does presuppose a solution. And that could be a solution to a lot of things. I mean, we've already gone to, advanced classes online.
And those are other things that we're gonna continue to work on
Yeah.
to Senator Ron Hinsdale's questions, which those are not operative in this bill, but we're gonna
Right.
continue to work on. And I think I would prefer if we could devote our energies to that. One of the things
Okay.
about the reporting requirements, I mean, this is a small thing, but we do have a significant number of new reports and other things on our books this year, and we're a very lean agency, so I would prefer not to be prepared to engage in the conversation in January,
Okay.
decide not to fund it. And certainly we'll have a better idea of how all of our attempts and efforts in this area are working.
For now, we'll strike it. I'll talk to Senator Campion. He may have some, because he's a lot more familiar with the language than I am. He might have some midway language. If that's okay, I can offer it on behalf of the committee. Just, you can all join me as one of your best wishes. Okay. Thank you, everyone. I think that's it for Monday. We're done. This is going to be catch as catch can tomorrow. Okay, tomorrow tomorrow it says we're going over that property, the reappraisal bill, which we are not gonna get out this year. That may change, depending on if we get sent things. If the Barry TIF bill comes back to us, then that's what we'll do. There's a child care bill, if it comes back, then that's what we'll do. Welcome to the end of the session. Bring a good book, because there's gonna be a lot of hurry up and wait.
Sent you an email about the Barry Tech bill, sorry, about the conversation.
But I had it plugged in at home and it's dead, so I don't know what was the matter with my plug at home. I just assumed it was charged. So I haven't gotten to it, but I'm trying to get a little time to do that. Oh, thank you, that's it.